Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to Searchlights. We're going to give it just a minute or two for people to find their way into the room. We know that there were several of you waiting, which is lovely. Makes us really excited to know that you found some time to join us today. But we'll give a little bit more time just for anybody who might be joining us, and we'll make a start in just a moment. Okay. Good morning to everybody, or certainly good morning from a rather dreary looking UK. I think you can tell by the lighting that the days are getting a little bit shorter now and a bit colder too. So I'm certain some of you are joining us from warmer climes. And as usual, it'd be lovely to know exactly where you are in the world by saying hello in chat and letting us know where you are. Welcome back. We're now in our third season of Searchlights. Where's the time gone? For those of you like us who've been returning from a summer break, we hope that you were well rested and obviously wish you very well for the academic year ahead. And for those of you who may be approaching a break for the end of your academic year, hopefully at some point you will also feel well rested. A gentle reminder that we keep ourselves on mute for the benefit of the conversation, and that the chat box is there for you to ask any questions that you've got about today's sessions. At the end of our last season, we do take time to look back and review how you've engaged with different sessions across the season. We had a look, and the library of sessions that we have now got, and you can find within our support pages, to sort of better understand which themes you engaged with in higher numbers. And we found that although our sessions with external experts, and we're planning some of those again for you this year, were very popular, the thing that seemed to have the maximum number of engagements was actually that where we were joined by one of our colleagues, Rachel O'Neill, who is leading a team of education advisors, of which Polly is one, and I was previously, looking at the way in which you can engage with your data, whether that's universal data that you use with all learners like CAT4 or NGRT or any other type of assessment of that nature, or your more targeted data. And we wondered how helpful it might be, or how helpful rather you might find it, for us to maybe host occasionally what we call a case study session, where we will investigate with our old sort of Senko hats on, if you like, anonymized data, and think about the types of questions that we might ask ourselves of that data to look at and investigate a little bit more about the learner, and consider possible next steps. As well as letting us know where you are in the world, excuse me, if you could let us know in chat if you think that could be something that you would find useful, that would be really helpful, and then we can shape those sessions for you into the future. So for today's session, we're going to be focusing on a publication that's from the UK, that in July was published by the Ambition Institute and the Confederation of Schools Trusts. Now, although we're very aware this is a UK publication and we're being joined by people from all over the world, we do think it has got applicability outside of the UK. Just to give you some context, though, it provided insights from over 8,400 schools, and it was exploring the way that educational settings are implementing inclusive practices for students with SEND. So you can see why we thought it might be quite useful. We've taken a moment to think about the 5 key insights that were generated from the report, and Polly and Debbie and I are each going to choose one of those to talk to you about in a little bit more detail. But what we will do is make sure that the URL for that report and all its detail is available to you for you to have a look at a later date if you'd like. So I'm going to hand over to Polly, who's going to talk to you about the first of those insights. Polly.
Thank you, Emma. Yes, so insight 1, really interesting, is all about establishing those strong foundations for inclusive practice. So a bit like a building, if that base isn't secure, then everything built on top is at risk of collapsing. So to think about, what do these foundations look like in a school setting, and how do we build them effectively? And it starts with truly knowing your children, which sounds really easy, but sometimes these easy and simple things are often forgotten. We think we need to do things that are big and grand. But knowing your students, knowing your children, knowing them well, getting to know them early and checking in regularly, that deep understanding of each child must be paired with insights into those individual barriers to learning. And once you've got those that knowledge, then you can begin to shape those inclusive strategies that are going to be meaningful and effective. Now, if you joined us for our episode just before the summer break in June, you'll remember our discussion on the different phases of transitions. And these transitions, as we always discuss, so repeating myself a little bit, whether that is between those year groups, different schools, different key stages, are those critical moments for building relationships and embedding that inclusive practice. And they actually offer really valuable opportunities to understand how to best support the children that you're working with. There's many schools also emphasize the importance of planning ahead. And again, when we reflect on that and apply it to sort of our day-to-day lives, we naturally plan ahead. So why wouldn't we do that in school? So meeting families, learning about the family dynamics, listening to their experiences, understanding what their hopes are for their children. And these conversations give you those rich insights that you can then share across the wider school team, which may include Senko, safeguarding lead, parent support advisor, and any other specialist teachers. So the more knowledge that can be shared that's relevant, then the better that child could be supported. And then once you've gathered that contextual information, you can then combine that with your quantitative data. So like attainment scores, and if you're using ability scores or you've got some wellbeing scores, you can pull all that data together. So you then got that dual lens where you can interpret the numbers, that you've got that data, but you can also apply that to those lived experiences of each child. At GL assessment, tools like PT and NGRT series, so that's the attainment, CAT4, cognitive ability, and PASS, which identifies those sort of non-academic barriers, are those tools that can allow you to triangulate that data for a fuller picture. But regardless of the tools you use, whatever you're using, the goal is the same, is to piece together that holistic view of a student. Interestingly, and from a lived experience as well, many schools do report that the data does often align with the professional instincts. And that's a really powerful validation of the judgments that you're making through those conversations with families, teaching assistants and colleagues. Some schools might collaborate with external professionals. So those are people like educational psychologists, speech and language therapists, to deepen their understanding and refine approaches where things are getting a little bit stuck maybe. Like in my own experience, regular inclusion meetings have been invaluable. And these were just weekly sessions where we brought together key staff. So myself as the Senko, our safeguarding lead, parent support advisor, and also our deputy head who also had inclusion responsibilities. And we shared and reviewed information. And the protected time to share the information was invaluable. The support was well coordinated, it was consistent, and it was effective. And we also had a shared language. And by doing that, by having a shared language and aligning of strategies, you can see real progress. And not just academically, schools, there's that side of it that is important, but you also see that progress in students' personal development and well-being as well. So sort of to bring that all together, we've got some sort of key areas for building those strong foundations for inclusive practice. So get to know your students really early and get to know them well. Combine your contextual insights with those structured assessments. Trust and refine your professional judgment. Don't let that professional judgment slip away. It is really important. Collaborate across teams and with families. The families are really important. Review and adapt your strategies regularly. So as we all know, one thing works for 1 week and then next week it doesn't work, and you're sort of back on the treadmill trying to find what's going to work again. So make sure those strategies are being reviewed regularly. When those elements come together, you've got those strategic systems for early support. You can accurately identify needs and you can put in those timely interventions. And the outcome of that is you will have happy, confident and successful young people ready to thrive. So that was Insight 1, which I found really interesting. And I will now pass on to Debbie, who's going to share Insight 2.
Thank you, Polly. Insight 2 is about ensuring high quality expert teaching with early targeted support for students to promote inclusive classrooms. High quality, evidence-informed inclusive teaching practice involves using a holistic approach and creating accessible, meaningful and welcoming environments for all learners. The focus should be on expert teaching, which should involve targeted support for the students if required. Positive relationships with families and communities should be encouraged, together with collaboration between all professionals. And having a planned shared responsibility for inclusion approach in place, this can be achieved by using UDL, Universal Design for Learning. This is an educational framework for how to develop lesson plans and assessments. It makes learning accessible and effective for all students by offering multiple means of engagement, representation and expression, such as providing digital text with audio or allowing students to demonstrate their understanding through videos, presentations or written work. This framework allows educators to make learning accessible, significant and relevant for students, permitting them to anticipate and overcome barriers by creating learning materials and activities that are accessible to all students and provide flexible options for engagement. Data-informed instruction entails educators regularly collecting and analysing student data to inform decision-making regarding modifying the curriculum, as well as differentiating their teaching to meet the needs of individual students and addressing any barriers to learning. It's very important to foster peer and professional collaboration, encouraging interaction and support between students and their peers will help to develop their social skills. All professionals involved should work as a multidisciplinary team to support the best interests of the student. In addition, family members should also be included in the planning, delivery, and supporting of achievable goals to help the students meet their targets. Evidence-based practices, or EBDs, are required. Practitioners should utilise instructional strategies with demonstrated effectiveness, taking into account active learning, metacognition, and formative assessment to support their students' learning journey. Active learning is an approach that fully engages students in the learning process through activities, problem solving, and discussions aimed at encouraging greater comprehension and improved retention of knowledge. Metacognition allows students to be aware of and understand their own thought processes. And this is in three main areas: planning, monitoring, and evaluation. Modelling thought processes can help students self-regulate their learning, and formative assessment is an ongoing process used by educators to monitor student learning and provide feedback that can improve teaching and learning and allow for timely interventions. There should also be a focus on belonging. Students should feel that they are in a secure, supportive, caring and constructive environment where they feel valued and respected. Educators will need support to enable them to implement these strategies in an effective and successful manner. They will need to be provided with resources, time and training to allow them to develop the skills necessary to access their students effectively and to collect and analyse the data to ensure that it is used constructively. Teachers will need financial, spatial and temporal resources to support them with this. And clear structures should be established. For example, daily schedules, effective organisation, supported professional development and data-driven decision-making. With all of these principles in place and embedded consistently within the classroom, this can result in inclusive schools where more learners stay in class, feel supported and make better progress. I'll now pass you over to Emma for Insight 3.
Thank you, Debbie. So Insight 3 recognises that many schools and trusts have embedded graduated systems to ensure consistency of support and clarity of responsibility. And by adopting that graduated model, they're enabled to be more coordinated in terms of those evidence-informed approaches and to leverage the internal expertise of teachers and specialist staff to foster confidence and strengthen everyday practice. And I think that's probably what we're all aiming for in terms of our best practice. Now, if you've joined us for previous sessions, you'll have heard us reference several times the importance of a tiered support system. That terminology might be different in your environment. We might talk about graduated models. Some people might talk about waves of interventions, and others a multi-tiered support system, or MTSS. Often, in my experience, those are visually represented by that sort of inverted triangle with layers that indicate the degrees of support. However, I recently came upon this alternative view, which Polly's going to be sharing on screen, where the principle remains the same. Universal provision is for all and a more targeted or personalised support aimed at those who need it when they need it. But what I really appreciated about this representation is the important visual reminder that what is necessary for some is useful for all learners as part of that tier 1. And so I think going forward, this is probably the approach that I would adopt when talking to colleagues in schools. Now, in the interest of supporting your tiered approach, we've developed over time several resources which we hope will help you. So just a gentle reminder, if you're using something like NGRT, don't forget that the reading support pathway is built on that graduated response model. So do make use of that interactive tool that's now embedded into your NGRT reports. If you're using Cat4, which as a former primary SENC, I couldn't wait for Cat4 data to be available for me with our year 3 learners, then we've got the Cat4 Learner Guide, which gives you some of those illustrative examples of how you might understand your Cat4 data as you begin to better understand your learners. Now, we've also got our identification flowchart. Now, this has been designed, I'll be honest, around my previous working practice, and it is a universal approach that we hope will give you a mechanism to start framing your own approach. Now, quite probably a lot of you have already got these systems set up and you'll have your own resources, but just in case this might be useful, we wanted to share it with you. And essentially, this flowchart has 3 main parts. The first offers that useful sort of foundation, as I mentioned, to build your own tiered referral process specific to the context of your setting. And that essentially will help you to build that consistent model that can be familiar to all practitioners engaged around it over time. And we will make sure, of course, that we share the link to this particular PDF with you during the illuminations part of the session. The second part of the flowchart gives you some suggested thresholds for if you're using some of our standardised assessment data for things like attainment, ability and attitude. And you've heard us talk before, and if you've attended any other webinars or training resources that are available on our support site, or even looked at some of our data spotlights, you'll understand that these thresholds are based on a normal distribution of results. And so what's really important for us to remind you of is you need to consider these thresholds within the context of your learners and your settings and determine whether your student population is in fact typical and where it may not be. And we know often in international contexts where there are a larger number of students, perhaps with English as an additional language and so on and so forth, you might need to make some adjustments as necessary to represent your population. And then the final part of that flowchart are some helpful reminders as to the sort of data and evidence that's essential for contextualizing quantitative data. We always talk about the importance of looking not just at the numbers, but beyond, understanding the learner as a whole. And so although these results from standardized assessments can provide those really powerful benchmarks and allow you to make those useful comparisons for attainment and progress, they should never be considered in isolation. And so I think that's a really important thing that we're trying to remind you of in that last part of the flowchart. And so just circling back to the report for a moment, the other standout for me from that third insight was the coherent and expert targeted support that they described as the transparent approach that schools and trust adopted in terms of outlining their core offer. And by that we mean the clarity of what pupils and families could expect from classroom teaching and wider support within the setting. Now in England, that is a requirement for local authorities to describe provision that's ordinarily available to all children and families. But we do know from our own prior experience and from learning and speaking with colleagues in various different international contexts that many schools take that similar approach to visibly outlining their tiers of provision, which really is helpful to families in terms of understanding what steps the school is going to take in order to support their child's needs. So definitely a few points that we took from that report for reflection, and we hope that those have been useful to you as well. I've popped the link to that URL within the chat, along with a couple of other recommendations that speak to the intentional leadership of SEND, but I'm going to hand back to Polly now because she's got a few more ideas for you within our illuminations. Polly.
Thank you, Emma. Once again, a session full of insight and food for thought. So I hope that's given you something to sort of take away and think about. Our illuminations this month, due to the content where we've been quite busy and giving you a lot of information, just comes as a summary to our discussion today. So bringing together those insights for you to take away and consider within your own settings. So just a reminder what we covered, we looked at early identification so that you can plan for success. Looked at that high quality teaching, making sure that it is evidence informed, and then looking at those clear and consistent systems so for universal provision and those targeted interventions. As Emma says, she has popped the link into the full report so you can explore the other insights as well. But we picked those three as a starting point that we thought were really interesting. So please do make use of those resources. We're also going to share some other links with you. So we've got the assessment for SEND identification flowchart that Emma shared with you. So that's a link that will be going into the chat. We also have a webinar that's of interest, and it's called One School, Four Viewpoints. So looking at learning support within one school, but the perspective of different people there. So we've got that webinar going into the chat as well. And then we do have a case study for you. So supporting SEND needs across a trust. So hopefully, along with the content today and all those resources, that gives you a great set of tools for you to explore within your own settings. So that's it for the illuminations for today. I will hand over to Debbie, who's going to tell us about next month now.
Thank you, Polly. As always, thank you all very much for joining our session today. It was lovely to see so many attendees, and our next session is a little bit earlier in the month next time, so I hope you will all join us for that on October the 7th, when we will be discussing engagement and wellbeing. Attendance remains a top priority for schools, and we're going to dive into how wellbeing can impact attendance and discuss some effective strategies to support improvement in this crucial area. You learn practical strategies to enhance both attendance and wellbeing, which will help students thrive both academically and personally. Finally, if you could spare just a few minutes to offer your feedback, using the QR code, which will appear, there it is, on screen, we would really appreciate it, as it does help us tailor the sessions to suit your interests. And don't forget, please do keep your questions coming in readiness for future sessions. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.